The gift sat on my lap like an insult wrapped in shiny paper. A coffee maker. That's what my parents thought my wedding day was worth. I ran my hand over the box, tracing the cheap cardboard edges, pretending to admire it as if it were something precious. My lips curled into a polite smile, the kind of smile you give when the room is watching and you don't want them to see the sting. Inside though, I felt the burn rising in my chest. What would you do if your sister was handed millions, while you were given nothing but a coffee maker on your wedding day? Stay with me. This dark revenge story will leave you breathless until the very end. I glanced at the clock on the wall. It was 7:42 p.m., the banquet hall glowing under those soft golden lights they always rent for weddings. The smell of roast chicken and buttered rolls lingered in the air, but all I could taste was bitterness. My sister sat across from me, her ring glinting under the chandelier, laughing as if she'd won some private competition. He probably had. Only a few years earlier at her engagement she unwrapped $1.2 million in shares from our parents. I still remember the way the crowd gasped, the way she cried and clung to mother like she'd just been handed the keys to a kingdom. I'd clapped along, hiding my own envy under layers of duty and silence. But tonight, watching her smirk as I unwrapped my so-called wedding gift, I realized something. Duty doesn't buy you respect. I set the box down gently like it was fragile porcelain, not plastic machinery. My new husband leaned over and whispered, "It's thoughtful," trying to soothe the moment, but even he couldn't hide the hesitation in his voice. He knew it wasn't thoughtful. It was humiliating. I tilted my head, smiled wider and said, "I love it." My voice carried just enough sweetness to sound believable, but underneath it was steel. My mother's eyes met mine then, and for the briefest second I saw it. A flicker of something smug, almost satisfied. She knew exactly what she was doing. I folded my hands in my lap and thought, "You've underestimated me again." The music swelled in the background, violins and a tired DJ blending into a blur. Guests lined up for cake. The clinking of glasses and bursts of laughter filled the air, but my ears tuned only to the rhythm of my own heart. Slow, steady. Too steady for someone humiliated. Because the truth was I wasn't angry. Not really. I was cold. Calculating. And that calmness was my advantage. The hidden advantage I had carried all my life. While they celebrated my sister's triumphs, I had learned to watch. While they handed her keys to the car, I had memorized the way engines worked. While they gave her shares, I had learned how the paperwork behind them could be shifted, twisted, and undone. And tonight, as I held that coffee maker, I wasn't thinking about bitterness. I was thinking about strategy. My uncle leaned over the table, breaking my thoughts. "Well now, isn't that practical?" he chuckled, gesturing at the box. "Every home needs one." "Yes," I replied, turning the box so the brand name faced the crowd. "It'll remind me of today every time I use it." The table erupted in polite laughter. Only my sister caught the faint edge in my voice. She raised a brow, smirking, sipping her wine like she'd already won. But she didn't notice the way I was studying her. The little details she overlooked. Her nails, freshly manicured but chipped at the edges. The way she flinched when her fiancé checked his phone instead of her face. The hurried whispers she shared with my mother when she thought no one was looking. I noticed everything. I always had. As the evening dragged on, I excused myself to the hallway. The carpet smelled faintly of dust and spilled champagne. My heels clicked softly as I walked, the sound echoing in the quiet. For a moment I leaned against the wall, closing my eyes. I thought back to when I was 14, cleaning the kitchen while my sister got ready for prom. My mother had told me I wasn't the pretty one, but the reliable one. I'd swallowed the words then, smiling as if it were a compliment. I thought of the years I paid bills behind the scenes, skipped vacations, stayed up late helping my father with paperwork. None of that earned me their respect. It only made me invisible. But invisibility has its uses. Because the one no one sees coming is the one who can strike the hardest. "Everything all right?" It was my father stepping into the hallway. His tie hung loose around his neck, his cheeks red from wine. "Perfect," I said smoothly, pushing away from the wall. He studied me for a second, maybe sensing something. Maybe not. "It's a good gift. Useful. Not flashy, but you'll use it every day." I nodded, keeping my smile steady. Stat. Every day. But what I didn't say, what I never would say to him, was that every time I pressed that coffee maker's button, I wouldn't think of convenience. I'd think of tonight. of humiliation turned into fuel, of the careful patience I had learned all my life. When I returned to the reception, the crowd was louder, drunker. My sister stood near the stage, her fiancé's arm draped around her waist. She looked like a queen, basking in the light of her imagined kingdom. I walked up to her, box still in my arms. "It's a beautiful night," I said softly. She tilted her head, eyes glimmering. "It is. Some of us are luckier than others." I leaned closer, lowering my voice so only she could hear. "Luck runs out." Her smile faltered for just a moment. Then she laughed, a high-pitched sound that blended with the clinking glasses and the DJ's tired playlist. But I saw it, the unease behind her eyes. And I knew then that the game had begun. The night ended with sparklers and photographs. Guests shouted blessings, children danced barefoot on the sticky floor, the band played their final tune. My husband carried our coats, but I insisted on holding the box myself. My arms ached, but I refused to set it down. Because it wasn't just a coffee maker. It was a reminder. A symbol. A spark for something far larger than my family could imagine. As we stepped into the cool night air, the clock chimed 11:06 p.m. The sky was clear, the moon sharp against the dark. My sister waved at the door, her laughter trailing behind us like smoke. I tightened my grip on the box, feeling the cardboard dig into my palms. They thought they had humiliated me tonight. But humiliation in the right hands isn't defeat. It's preparation. And one day soon they would realize the cost of underestimating me. Back at our small apartment, I set the coffee maker on the kitchen counter. My husband had gone to bed already, exhausted from the long reception. I stayed behind, my hands resting on the cold plastic surface of that box, staring at it like it was alive. The hum of the refrigerator filled the silence, the clock ticking steadily on the wall. Each sound felt louder than usual, like my world had sharpened into focus. I pulled out a notebook from the drawer, a plain, spiral-bound one I'd kept for grocery lists. But tonight it wasn't for groceries. On the first line in neat block letters. Then I started listing. Not just tonight's insult, but every sacrifice, every dismissal, every sly remark my mother or sister had ever made. The times I cleaned the house while they prepared for parties. The money I slipped quietly into the electric bill when my father forgot. The birthdays overlooked, the thank yous never spoken. By the time I looked up, it was past midnight and my hand ached from writing. But my heart felt lighter. The next morning, my husband noticed the notebook on the table. "What's all this?" he asked, flipping through the pages. "Just notes," I said, taking it back gently. He studied me, brow furrowed. "You're not still upset about last night, are you?" I smiled, sipping the weak coffee from our old machine. "I'm not upset," I replied calmly. "I'm just paying attention." He didn't press further, but I saw the unease in his eyes. He'd married me because I was steady, dependable, not the kind to brood. But steadiness can be mistaken for weakness. And last night proved that they all thought I was weak. That would be their first mistake. Over the following weeks, I became a quiet observer in my own family. Every phone call, every visit, every casual conversation, I listened closer than I ever had before. My mother's tone when she spoke of my sister was always thick with pride, but when she spoke of me, it was perfunctory, clipped. "She's fine," she'd tell her friends, while gushing endlessly about my sister's new outfits, her vacations, her potential. My father, distracted as always, left envelopes scattered across his desk. Receipts, bank statements, notes scribbled in his hurried handwriting. While my mother cooked, I would slip into his office under the guise of bringing him tea. And I'd notice the past due stamp on the utility bill, the note about a missed loan payment, numbers that didn't add up. They hid their weaknesses well in public, but at home cracks showed. One afternoon, my sister invited me over to see her new place. I went not because I cared about her latest luxury condo, but because I wanted to observe. The place was immaculate, almost sterile, with white couches and sparkling glass tables. She poured me wine more expensive than anything I'd ever bought and leaned against the counter. "You looked so grateful the other night," she said with a smirk. I sipped my drink slowly, letting the sweetness linger on my tongue before replying. "Gratefulness has its uses." She laughed, not catching the edge in my voice. But I caught hers, the slight bitterness when she complained about her fiancé's long work hours, The way her smile dimmed when she admitted she hadn't been able to access one of her accounts because of some paperwork issue. I wrote it down that night. Every word. Every crack. My notebook filled quickly. Page after page of observations, small and large. I noted dates, times, patterns. The way my mother always slipped her gold bracelet off when she thought no one was looking, worried it might be damaged. The way my father's hand trembled when he signed checks, a sign of the mounting stress he tried to hide. The way my sister lied casually, telling her friends she had paid off her car in full when I knew she was still making payments. It wasn't about gossip. It was about leverage. And leverage in the right hands is power. There were moments, of course, when guilt tried to creep in. Late at night, lying beside my husband, I'd ask myself, is this who I want to become? A woman with a notebook full of my family's flaws? But then I'd remember the coffee maker. The smug glance my mother gave me as I unwrapped it. The laughter I heard from my sister's corner of the table. And the guilt would vanish like steam. One evening my mother called. "Your sister's engagement party is next month," she said briskly. "Don't forget to bring a gift." My lips twitched. "Of course," I replied. When I hung up, I opened my notebook. On a fresh page I wrote, "They will never see me coming." I underlined it twice. At work even, I found myself sharpening my skills. I worked in a small office, handling paperwork for a local firm. Nothing glamorous, but it gave me access to the kind of forms, processes, and documents most people overlook. I learned how signatures could be copied, how deadlines could be shifted, how numbers could be moved around until the truth looked entirely different. It wasn't illegal, not yet. It was just practice. Quiet practice, unnoticed by anyone. The kind of practice that makes you dangerous when underestimated. The more I wrote, the more I noticed. And the more I noticed, the more I understood something important. My family wasn't untouchable. They were fragile. Delicate. They built their pride on appearances, on stories they told others about their wealth and success. But appearances can be shattered. The trick was to know where to tap the glass. One Sunday I visited again. My sister showed off a new dress while my parents praised her endlessly. I stood in the corner, quiet, watching. My father left his checkbook on the side table. I glanced down and saw the name of a bank I didn't recognize. Later I asked casually, "A new bank?" He stiffened, then shrugged. "Just diversifying." But I saw the truth in his eyes. Desperation. That night I wrote it down. Along with the date, the amount, and the name. By the time autumn rolled in, my notebook was nearly full. The pages bristled with tiny details, some insignificant on their own, but together forming a map. A map of weaknesses, lies, and opportunities. It was no longer just about a coffee maker. It was about years of neglect, years of being the forgotten daughter. And the forgotten daughter was finally paying attention. The last entry I wrote before closing the book that season was simple. Every empire falls. Even the small ones built on favoritism. I closed the notebook, slid it under my bed, and lay down with a calm smile on my face. They had no idea. No idea at all. But I did. And once you see the cracks, you can't stop staring at them. It began with a whisper. My sister's voice carried from the kitchen during a Sunday visit, hushed but sharp. I sat in the living room, pretending to flip through a magazine while my parents set the table. The smell of roasted chicken filled the house, yet all I tasted was the bitter edge in her tone. "I told you the account isn't fixed yet. Stop asking me," she snapped into her phone. Pause. Then softer, more pleading, "Please, just give me time." She emerged a few minutes later, cheeks flushed, plastering on that polished smile. No one else noticed, but I did. I tucked it away, another line in my notebook later that night. The whispers kept coming. Sometimes on the phone, sometimes in hurried conversations with my mother. Always quick, always brushed aside with a laugh if anyone questioned. "What's so secret?" I asked casually one afternoon. "Work stuff," she said with a wave. "You wouldn't understand." But her eyes flickered just for a second. And that was enough. The papers came next. My father had left a folder on the dining table, half buried under yesterday's newspaper. Normally I wouldn't touch it, but something pulled me closer. Inside were statements, pages of numbers, overdue notices tucked in between. My breath caught as I scanned the dates. Late payments. Loans I didn't know existed. Amounts higher than anything he'd ever admitted. I closed the folder quickly when footsteps echoed down the hall. My hands trembled, but my face stayed calm. That night I wrote again. The empire is hollow. They've been propping it up with borrowed time. At work I started practicing subtle skills. When clients left documents behind, I studied how financial statements were structured, how signatures could be traced, how numbers could be shifted without raising suspicion. My fingers itched with the possibility. Not to act yet, but to prepare. Preparation is power. And patience. Patience is survival. One evening I met my old friend Marjorie for coffee. She'd known me since school, one of the few who ever asked how I was doing instead of how my sister was. "You look tired," she said gently, stirring her drink. "I've been noticing things," I replied carefully. "About my family." Her eyes narrowed with concern. "What kind of things?" I hesitated, then shrugged. "Just, they're not as perfect as they pretend." Marjorie chuckled, shaking her head. "Who is?" She couldn't know the depth of what I was seeing. But talking to her reminded me how alone I was in this. Alone, and sharper for it. The cracks widened. My sister bragged at a dinner party about her new investment, her voice loud enough for everyone to hear. But when someone asked for details, she stumbled, changing the subject to her shoes. Later that night, I overheard my mother scolding her in the kitchen. "Do you want people asking questions?" My sister hissed back, "Well, maybe if Dad hadn't," before the words cut off. I froze in the hallway, heart pounding, waiting for the rest. But the door closed and the rest was muffled. So I had heard enough. I started testing small moves. Nothing drastic, just nudges. An offhand remark to her fiancé when I, accidentally, ran into him at the store. "She's been so stressed lately," I said with a sigh. "Always on the phone about some account. I hope she's not hiding anything from you." He laughed it off, but his eyes clouded. That was all I needed. A seed planted. Seeds grow. Meanwhile, the papers piled up. Every visit gave me something new. A receipt left on the counter. A note scribbled in haste. Even the trash bin held treasures. Torn envelopes, credit card offers, scraps with numbers too high to be casual. One evening, while my mother entertained guests, I excused myself to the bathroom. On the way back, I slipped into the study. A quick glance, a faster memory. I didn't take anything, not yet. But I memorized enough to confirm what I suspected. They weren't wealthy. They were drowning. And they didn't even know I could swim circles around them. The satisfaction was strange. It wasn't joy exactly. More like quiet vindication. Every discovery reminded me that the pedestal they'd placed my sister on was built from paper. Flimsy, fragile, ready to collapse. But still I waited. I didn't want collapse by accident. I wanted collapse by design. One Saturday my sister invited me shopping. A rare gesture. We walked through racks of clothes, the scent of perfume heavy in the air. She held up a dress, price tag dangling like a taunt. "Isn't it beautiful?" she asked. "It is," I said evenly. "Can you afford it?" Her face hardened for a fraction of a second before she laughed. "Of course." But her hands shook as she swiped her card at the register. "Declined." The cashier smiled politely, asking if she wanted to try another. My sister fumbled, cheeks red, finally pulling out a different card. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. The crack was right there for me to see. That night I wrote in my notebook, "She bleeds like the rest of us." Even my father started to show strain. He snapped more often, his patience thinning. At dinner one evening, he slammed his fist on the table when my mother mentioned bills. "Not at the table," he barked, face flushed. I lowered my eyes, hiding my smirk. Because anger like that doesn't come from strength. It comes from fear. The whispers, the papers, the cracks, they all told the same story. The golden family I grew up resenting wasn't golden at all. They were just better at pretending. And as I sat one evening, notebook open, pen in hand, I realized something chilling. I didn't need to destroy them. They were already destroying themselves. All I had to do was help gravity do its work. That thought sat with me, heavy but exhilarating. I looked at the coffee maker on the counter, its surface reflecting the dim light of the kitchen. I brewed a cup, listening to the hiss and drip, breathing in the bitter scent. As the steam rose, I whispered to myself, "It's starting." And for the first time I truly believed it. That thought echoed in my mind as I poured the steaming coffee into the waiting cups. The kitchen filled with the sharp, bitter scent. The hiss of the machine a steady reminder of the night they tried to humiliate me. That same machine now sat proudly on my counter, polished and ready, But this time it wasn't just brewing coffee. It was brewing a moment. I had invited them for dinner. My parents, my sister, and her fiancé. It wasn't unusual, but it wasn't common either. I rarely hosted, and when I did, they treated it like an obligation, not an honor. Which was why I made sure the invitation sounded casual, almost desperate. I'd really love for us all to be together. Just a simple dinner. They agreed, of course. My mother never turned down the chance to judge my cooking. I spent the afternoon preparing, every detail precise. Roast chicken, garlic mashed potatoes, green beans with almonds. The table was set with my best china, the cloth ironed, candles waiting to be lit. Everything had to look ordinary, comfortable. Nothing should hint at the storm underneath. Except the coffee maker gleaming in the corner. I left it there on purpose. They arrived just after 6. My mother swept in first, wrapped in perfume that clung to the air. My father followed, tired eyes behind his glasses. My sister came in last, arm linked with her fiancé, her laughter just a little too loud. "Smells good," my father said, settling into his chair. "It's just a simple meal," I replied, smoothing the napkin on my lap. Dinner began like any other. Chatter about traffic, about the weather, about my sister's new dress. I nodded, smiled, passed dishes around. But under the polite surface I studied them. Every glance exchanged, every slip of the tongue. And slowly the cracks appeared. My father's fork clinked against his plate. "We've had some delays with the bank," he muttered when the conversation turned to money. My mother's hand brushed his arm, silencing him with a sharp look. My sister jumped in quickly, talking about her latest shopping trip, her voice higher than usual as if trying too hard. Her fiancé smiled politely, but I caught him checking his watch twice in 5 minutes. I filed it all away, each detail another entry in the ledger I no longer needed to write. The notes lived inside me now. Halfway through the meal, my mother finally looked at me. "You've done well," she said, her tone flat. "The chicken is moist." It was the closest thing to praise she'd given me in years. I smiled politely. "Thank you, Mother. I've had practice." A beat of silence followed. My sister sipped her wine, my father coughed, the clock on the wall ticked loudly. That was my opening. "So," I began lightly, "how are things going with the engagement plans?" My sister's fiancé perked up, eager to speak. But before he could, my sister cut him off. "Everything's fine. Just a few minor hiccups, nothing worth mentioning." "Minor hiccups?" I asked, tilting my head. "Funny, you sounded pretty stressed last week." Her eyes snapped to mine, sharp as glass. "What are you talking about?" "Oh, nothing," I said quickly, shrugging it off. "Just thought I overheard you on the phone, that's all." The table fell quiet. My sister's fiancé looked at her, brows furrowing. My father shifted uncomfortably, my mother's lips pressed thin. I took another bite of chicken, savoring the silence like it was the finest wine. When the meal ended, I stood. "Coffee?" I asked brightly. They all agreed, unsuspecting. I carried the cups into the kitchen one by one, filling them with steaming, dark liquid. The machine gurgled and hissed, its sound filling the space like a drum roll. I carried the tray back to the table, setting each cup carefully in front of them. The smell of roasted beans filled the air. My sister wrinkled her nose. "Is this new?" "Yes," I said, sliding into my chair. "It's the one you all gave me. I use it every day." Her fiancé chuckled. "A practical gift." I smiled thinly. "Very practical." The coffee was too hot to drink at first, which gave me time. I leaned back, folding my hands in my lap. "You know," I said casually, "I've been noticing things lately. Little things." My father froze, cup halfway to his lips. My mother's eyes narrowed. "Like what?" she asked sharply. "Oh, just papers lying around, conversations overheard. You'd be surprised what a person picks up when they're paying attention." The air thickened. My sister shifted in her seat, her fiancé glanced between us, clearly sensing something he didn't understand. I leaned forward slightly, lowering my voice. "It's interesting, isn't it, how easy it is for cracks to show?" My sister slammed her cup down. "What are you implying?" "Nothing," I said sweetly. "Only that sometimes appearances don't match reality. But I suppose you already know that." Her fiancé's brow furrowed deeper. "What does she mean?" My sister's face flushed crimson. "She's just jealous. Don't listen to her." I sipped my coffee, the bitterness coating my tongue. "Jealous? Maybe once. But not anymore. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the ticking clock. My mother finally spoke, her voice low but firm. Enough. Whatever game you're playing, stop it. I set my cup down carefully, meeting her eyes. Game? I don't play games. I just observe. And then, with deliberate calm, I slid a folded document from under the table and placed it in the center. Not the most damning piece, not yet, but enough. A copy of a late payment notice I'd picked up from their trash months ago. The room went still. My father's face drained of color. My mother reached for the paper, her hand trembling. My sister leaned forward, eyes wide, while her fiancé stared at her like he'd never seen her before. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. They looked at me then, all of them. My parents with shock, my sister with fury, her fiancé with confusion. For the first time in my life, I had their full attention. And I smiled. Because this was only the beginning. The document lay in the center of the table like a wound no one wanted to touch. My father stared at it as if by sheer force he could erase the words printed in black. My mother's lips pressed thin, her fingers curling around the edges as though she might rip it apart. My sister looked between them, panic flickering in her eyes, while her fiancé leaned back slowly, suspicion dawning across his face. I folded my hands in my lap, calm, steady. My heart should have been racing, but instead it beat slow and measured, like a clock ticking toward the inevitable. You went through our things, my mother finally hissed. No, I corrected softly. Your things went through me. You left them lying around. You always assumed I wasn't paying attention. The silence stretched until my sister snapped, her voice trembling. This doesn't mean anything. Everyone has bills. Her fiancé turned sharply. Late bills? Hidden accounts? Is that what you've been hiding? She flinched. And there was the crack widening. I reached for my coffee, lifting it with both hands, savoring the heat against my palms. That's just one page, I murmured. There are more. My father's eyes darted to me. More. I set the cup down gently. Folders. Files. Copies. I've been keeping notes for months. My mother's face went pale, and for the first time I saw it, fear. Not anger, not disappointment, but raw fear. Tasted sweeter than any wine. My sister slammed her hand on the table. Why? Why would you do this to us? The laugh that slipped out of me was quiet, almost foreign. Why? Because while you were being celebrated, I was being forgotten. Because when you got millions in shares, I got a coffee maker. Because every sacrifice I made for this family was erased, replaced by your endless praise. Her fiancé sat back, stunned, while my father rubbed his temples, the weight of years pressing down. You could have asked, my mother whispered, her voice brittle. I did, I replied evenly. Every day of my life I asked, not with words but with actions. And you never answered. I pulled a second document from under the table. A bank statement this time, one with figures that spoke louder than any accusation. I slid it forward. My sister's fiancé snatched it up, scanning quickly, his face tightening with every line. You told me everything was paid off, he said coldly to her. Her mouth opened, closed, no sound escaping. I leaned back, folding my arms. Seems trust doesn't come free, does it? The air thickened, heavy with unspoken truths. My parents looked smaller somehow, their pride stripped away. My sister, for once, had no words. I let the silence stretch before I spoke again, each word deliberate. You gave me a machine to make coffee thinking it was enough. But what you really gave me was clarity. Every time I pressed that button, I remembered how little I mattered to you. And so I paid attention. I collected. I prepared. I stood then, moving to the counter. The coffee maker gleamed under the light, innocent yet loaded with meaning. I lifted it carefully, carrying it back to the table and placed it in front of my mother. This is yours, I said. It's all you ever thought I was worth. Now it's all you have left. My sister pushed back from the table, her chair scraping the floor. You've ruined everything, she spat. I met her eyes steadily. No, you ruined everything when you built your life on lies and expected me to look away. I didn't ruin it. I just revealed it. Her fiancé stood, the documents clutched in his hand. We'll talk later, he said stiffly and left without another word. The slam of the door echoed like a verdict. My sister's face crumpled, her mask shattered. And I felt nothing but calm. My father tried one last time, his voice broken. We're still your family. I shook my head slowly. Family protects. Family remembers. You forgot me long ago. I gathered the rest of the documents from my bag, setting them neatly in a stack on the table. These are copies. The originals are safe. Don't bother trying to make them disappear. Their eyes widened, the realization sinking in. They couldn't undo what I'd built. The coffee sat cooling in their cups, untouched. The smell, once comforting, now hung bitter in the air. My mother's hands trembled as she touched the machine as if it might burn her. You've destroyed us, she whispered. No, I said firmly. I've freed myself. I walked to the door, each step slow, deliberate. I didn't rush. This was not an escape, it was an exit. At the threshold I paused and turned back. You should have known, I said softly. The forgotten daughter always remembers. Then I left. The night air was cool against my skin as I stepped outside. The street was quiet, the sky clear. I took a deep breath, the weight that had pressed on me for years finally lifting. Behind me, the house stood silent, its walls no longer hiding secrets. Inside, my family sat surrounded by the wreckage of their own making. And I walked away, not broken, not invisible, but finally, undeniably seen. If this story shook you, imagine what's coming next. Subscribe now for more dark, emotional revenge stories, because every betrayal deserves to be told.